Director of Families Empowered. At Families Empowered is a non-for-profit, and we serve thousands of low and middle income Texans each year. We connect families who are looking for schools to schools that best fit their needs. The majority of the families we serve are already on charter school waitlists in Houston and San Antonio. So last year, over 44,000 applications were submitted for charter schools in Houston, and over 26,000 of those children are still on waiting lists today. In San Antonio, we will serve 13,000 families on charter school waitlists this coming year. This number is up from the 7,000 we served last year. So our parents are not as concerned with governance models or politics. Our annual survey consistently indicates that 60% of our families are open to private school options, even if that means assuming some tuition costs. Annually, we connect thousands of families to traditional schools, magnet schools, IB schools of choice, public charter schools, and private schools. We use technology to track parents and their school interests, and last year we had over 5,000 parents specifically ask for Catholic schools connections in Houston alone. The number of parents seeking private options has consistently increased over time. So you'll hear from a typical Families Empowered family today. Our parents are hardworking, loving people who make difficult choices to ensure their children's needs are met. Many of our parents have children with special needs, and our parents have one thing in common. They're trying to use the public system, and it's just not working for them. We have work to do to serve our families. We need better schools. We need better district schools. We need more private schools. We need better charter schools. We believe that this bill is an investment in innovation. It will move us forward as a state. We support this bill because we know that Texans need and want more public school options as well as private options, and our parents are counting on the Texas legislature to move us forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Dippel. Dollie Adams.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dollie Adams, and as a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, I'm proud to introduce you to my son, Ryan Doherty, who one day wants to be the President of the United States. I'm here to tell you his story. Ryan has always been a fun, charismatic, well-mannered, and silly child. He excelled in preschool, but his personality made him a target in elementary school. One day, while in the second grade, he came home from Reed Elementary School, our zone neighborhood school. He was shaking, crying, and bleeding from cuts on his face and his throat. He was holding his new glasses, and they were shattered in pieces in his hand. Ryan had been the victim of bullying. Another child attacked my son while with the plastic knife in the lunchroom, then continued the assault on the playground. Ryan was pushed, shoved, and had his glasses ripped off his face and stomped into the dirt. As you can imagine, I was infuriated, and I feared for my son's life. My initial impulse was to take him out of that school and transfer him. But what options did I have? I tried several charter schools, but I was put on a wait list at every single one. I looked into private schools near my home, but the best one I found to help children like Ryan would have cost me $30,000, and that's even if I qualified for financial aid, which I did not. I was stuck and I was scared. You see, Ryan has learning disabilities. After years of asking the school to test him, he was finally diagnosed with ADHD, Erlen syndrome, and Tourette's syndrome. Ryan needed the specialized schools, but for children like Ryan, it seemed perfect, but they were way out of my reach economically. I was out of options. I did everything I could for my son, so I quit my position as director of operations, and I pushed, and I did a ton of research to get the school that Ryan he deserved. Today, Ryan is one of the top performing Today, Ryan is one of the top performing students at his school. He's a fifth grader doing high school level algebra correctly. He's academically on the right track, and I'm proud of him and all that he's achieved. However, I had to quit my position and change my life entirely to get him there. All of this could have been prevented. Ryan was bullied, threatened, injured, and cast aside because he was different. I had to turn our family's lives upside down to make it right for him. I'm not saying that passing this bill will help everyone, but I can guarantee you that it would have helped me. It would have given me options when I needed them the most. Our children deserve to be educated in a friendly, safe environment of their choice that best suits their individual needs. Why do we force them to just make do in the wrong environment? So please, in considering this bill, keep in mind Ryan and all the Ryans out there, all the Texas families like mine who need help today. Thank you for your time, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. David Hinojosa.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is David Hinojosa. I'm the National Director of Policy at IDRA, the Intercultural Development Research Association in San Antonio. We've been around since 1973, crossing the borders between policy, practice, and research. I've submitted some written testimony that details what the research says on vouchers. And as was mentioned earlier, a lot of the research shows that the results are mixed. At best, sometimes vouchers show depressing achievement. There is no real improvement in the competition resulting from private schools on public schools, and there are instances of increased segregation. And it's oftentimes because vouchers, ESAs, neo-vouchers, however you want to define them, are more about the school's choice than the parent's choice. Vouchers without real safeguards, without civil rights protections, are more like civil wrongs than civil rights. Every child should have access to a strong neighborhood public school, but that's something that we're not talking about today. We don't have a strongly supported public school system. We have a haphazard, arbitrary funded public school system that doesn't take into individual student need oftentimes, and the weights established 3 decades ago is reflective of that for low income and English learners. In the IDRA, we like to say that the best way to strengthen public schools is by strengthening public schools. So thank you.
Catchy.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison, for your testimony. Junior Russell. Oh, we're gonna do one more and then we'll open it up. You'll be the first.
Ready? Hi, thank you, legislatures. I'm Ginger Russell. I'm the director of Texans for Homeschool Freedom. I'm speaking on behalf of Texas for Homeschool Freedom. The Texas Homeschool Coalition doesn't speak for me any longer. In 2013, many of you sat here on this committee as I sat here and blew the whistle on the controversial C-scope curriculum in Texas. Little did I know at the time, this was the implementation of college and career readiness standards, also known as Common Core in the state of Texas. Unfortunately, Texas is now aligning our accountability with the federal Every Student Succeeds Act due to the report handed over from the Texas Commission of the Next Generation of Assessments and Accountability. In regard to homeschool families, Texas homeschool families just want to be left alone. Texas homeschool families have proven time and time again that they do not need government intervention. And if this were to pass, Texas would be the first state in the country that would allow government subsidies into our homeschool community. The bullet points on Senate Bill 3. It's unconstitutional and does not promote liberty. It promotes an entitlement-dependent mindset. The U.S. Constitution does not mention education, and the Texas Constitution calls for a system of public free schools, not individual entitlements. This is not an education program, but a new state banking program ran by the Comptroller's Office. Section 29.359F of the bill states the Comptroller may contract with a private entity to administer all or part of the program. My first thought, this is a foothold for crony capitalism. It does not shrink government, it grows government, creating another level of bureaucracy. Under Senate Bill 3, a child in the public system can come out of this so-called failing public school system for the parent's choice and participate in the program. But if the child right now is in a good private school or a good homeschool community, they have to go back into this failing public school system for a year before they're eligible for these subsidies. No. School choice targets low-income children. These children get free breakfast and lunches at their public schools. Is this school choice allotment going to fund their meals as well? The narrative is that school choice will give parents control over their own tax dollars is ingenuous. When the state has to approve those expenditures and reimbursements, the state is in control, not the parent. As science author Janice Van Cleve describes it, school choice is parental freedom within governmental parameters. Why is it with Senate Bill 3, those that would participate would have to purchase state-approved material, but under Senate Bill 6 that allowed C-scope in the schools, districts can purchase whatever they choose? I urge you to vote no on this bill. It's unconstitutional. It does not promote freedom and it does not promote liberty. It's another entitlement program. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, ma'am. Senator West.
I'm interested in, sir, your name is?
No, question.
David E. Nohosa, Senator.
Mr. Hinojosa, you talked about the public school system, and I think the adequacy of funding of the public school system. Would you like to expound on that a little bit more?
Certainly. The way that Texas funds its public schools is based on prior year's appropriations, largely, right? So whatever they served last year, there's no evidence-based cost study support to support the current funding levels. When you look at the funding for English learners and for economically disadvantaged students, for example, those weights, the additional cost was set in 1984. And even then, even though it was proposed by a school working group to be funded at 40% for both of those, 40% additional, it was arbitrarily set back to 0.2 or 20% for low income and 10% for English learners. And now here we are 3 decades later, and we still have those same funding weights for those students. So yes, do we need increased accountability and monitoring of those funds, so that when they go down to, the school level, those students do receive, services based on that, of course. But the current funding levels are woefully inadequate. So when you're talking about a parent's choice and being able to choose between a public school, a ill-supported public school through many different means, even beyond funding, it's imperative that before you can even start talking about other choices, that you first explore routes to strongly support an excellent education for every child at every school in the state of Texas. And we are certainly not there yet. We have already seen the charter school experiment largely fail across the state of Texas. You've gone from $200 million to over $2 billion in appropriating money for charter schools to expand choice as though that is going to improve public schools, both in the charter schools and in the public schools. And the research shows, again, this is research that we're talking about, shows that those results have not come up. Now, charter schools have a great PR campaign, but they're not really doing any better, and sometimes they're doing much worse than our public schools. And a lot of that all can be circled back to how are public schools funded.
No, it's a question, so there's no buzzer.
Senator Taylor.
Mr. Nosa, just a question for you. Do you think of charter schools as increasing segregation as well?
Some charter schools have led to hyper-segregation in public schools. So there is already segregation in our public schools, largely because of district boundaries, the way that they've been set. It's been challenged in the courts at times, sometimes successful, many times not. But charter schools, the research does show that they have hyper-segregated school populations, both by encouraging white flight, so you create a charter school in or near a gentrified place, and so then you have white flight, to that school. But then other times, it's just because they're located in certain parts of the city with all the false promises of improving education for those kids, and many of those schools have been targeted for interventions and identified as low performing.
So I was inspired that you actually got it right. You actually refer to education savings accounts, which is what this bill is about. So it's good that you could get I'm glad you got the nomenclature about the bill. So that was a good sign. But just going back to what you just said, so charter schools have more or less minorities than traditional public schools?
In Texas, they tend to have higher percentages
of minorities,
of students of color, of African American and Latino students.
What about higher or lower affluence than traditional public schools?
They are higher in socioeconomic. I believe they're around, the last figures that I saw was about 70% economically disadvantaged compared to public schools, about 62%.
And so given that poorer parents and more minority parents choose charter schools, right? I think those are correct statements. Would you agree, or do you want to start citing studies?
Well, when you say more, there's more
Well, it's a higher
students of
percentage, right?
color.
You got 60% minority, 60% free, 6% economically disadvantaged in traditional public schools, and 70% in charter
Yeah, but you
schools.
also have an overall much lower overall enrollment of the schools. So I'm just talking about from a research perspective and analysis.
Okay, so proportionally more minority, charter schools have more minority parents than traditional public schools, and charter schools have more economically disadvantaged children than traditional public schools as a percentage of their population.
Yes.
Okay, so given that, how does that lead to how does that lead to segregation? I'm lost. What is?
Again,
I would think the opposite.
Again, you have different demographics in different charter schools. You can go to a Great Hearts school in Texas and see much different demographics than you see in a locally created charter school in urban Dallas, for
Okay,
example.
I disagree with that, but I just
So that's one.
as a generic statement. How do you come to the conclusion that it's creating segregation?
Well, again, because they often are located in certain areas, so they go from a school district that might be 80%, students of color, to a school now that is 95% students of color.
Oh shit, 50% increase.
That's hyper segregated.
Okay. They went from segregated to hyper.
I don't.
That's
Okay.
Thank you.
no more.
Senator Huffine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you mentioned that access to public schools. I'm just curious on that because last time I checked, that it's against the law not to go to school. You said you wanted free access to all the local public schools, neighborhood schools. Is
We
there a
believe-
problem with kids getting into the neighborhood school?
Now, what I'm saying is that at IDRA, we believe that every child should have the right to access a strongly supported public school,
And
and we are way off the mark from that right now for many school children.
And I'm just curious, you don't think charter schools are doing well? We have 150,000 children on the wait list for charter schools. Probably have a lot more than that if there was any chance of them getting in. So I guess those parents obviously have been fooled by some marketing or something. Is that what you're saying? That's just not true, that those schools are obviously worse schools than the public schools. That's what you're saying.
So, not what I say, it's what the research says.
I see.
And the research says that charter schools are not as high performing as traditional public schools overall, or they're about the same, and that when you look at the lowest performing schools in Texas, there's a higher percentage of low performing charter schools than there are traditional public schools. So,
And then you said
given the choices, if there is not some very smart marketing campaign, and I've seen some of those smart marketing campaigns, that certainly has to be one.
Oh no, sorry.
My question to you is, will you put your kid into that?
Why
Why
As to
would a
how and
charter
why.
school market themselves if they all have a waiting list? That's kind of a waste of money, and they can't pick and choose their student body. And you think that it's always about the money? Look, this isn't a school finance hearing, all right? And I'm sorry to report to everybody, but this isn't a school finance hearing we're talking about. And we have all these public pro-government school people coming up. Oh, I want more funding. That's not what this hearing's about. But I'm just curious: do you have a number that you'd be satisfied with for public funding for schools per student?
For
And
public
I'm sure
funding,
you've got a lot of evidence to support this number, that this is the magic recipe that's going to make government schools better than they ever could be.
so for public schools, there is an evidence-based estimate of the average M&O revenue alone, and that's about $67.50, and that's just for your average student. Now, for the additional cost for economically disadvantaged and English learner students, what the research has shown that those costs should be between 30% and 40% additional for economically disadvantaged and English learner students. There's still some special education students that are also underfunded, but what you need to understand is that our public school finance system, the funding, has never been set on studies. So oftentimes we're asked, well, tell us what the magic figure is. Tell us what the number is, because otherwise we can't change it. Well, I don't understand why the legislature can't tell us what that number is based on what their current funding
It's not their
levels
job to
are,
create that
because
number.
they're not. There is
Well, I
no
would say this
evidence-based
about
cost.
that the budget was approved by 30 out of 31 members of the Texas Senate last session. We all agreed that the proper amount of funding was given to public schools. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Adams, how long did it take the school to figure out the problem or situation with your son?
My son was in second grade when he finally got tested. I had been asking the school for 2 years. They were made aware of the bullying. I had been telling them for several months ahead of time that my son had been being bullied, and nothing happened. They just kept ignoring me until one day my son came home bleeding.
And what did it take to finally get their attention?
Everybody kept telling me that I didn't have many rights. Everybody kept telling me that the school was going to take care of it, that the school had it under control, that they were going to ramify the situation, that they were going to find a solution, and they even tried to tell me that my son was even going to be disciplined, even though he was the victim in the issue. That's when I made the decision to quit my job, and it wasn't like I was working for Wendy's or something. I had a very prestigious job that I quit because I wanted to make sure that my child got the proper education. And I researched. I did everything that I could. I went online. I went onto every site. I went onto the state site. I read the student handbook, which is very boring, by the way, but I read it, even though I fell asleep a few times. I did everything I could, and then I went to that school every single day, and I pushed to get my son the help that I thought he deserved. And he did, and he's doing great now.
And when you moved to the other school where he is now, how long did it take for them to figure out what was needed?
Well, my son is now in 5th grade, and he's been on a wait list for 3 years with the charter school. And just now, he's been accepted into 2 different charter schools. Next year, he'll be going either to the School of Science and Technology or to A+, both of which are charter schools within the Houston area. I cannot afford a private school. We couldn't afford a private school when we both were working. And now that I am a stay-at-home mom, we definitely can't afford it now. So a charter school, it took 3 years for my son to be accepted, and he was on that wait list. And you can bet that I was on that wait list every single year. And not just to 2 charter schools, to 5 or 6, or whichever many were in my reach. And not just in my area, all over the Houston area. A+ Academy, for example, is about 45 to 50 minutes away from my house. That's without Houston traffic. And I live near the 290 area, so you can imagine what the traffic is like in that area if you are from the Houston area. So it takes me quite a while to get there, and that was an option for me. I was willing to drive the distance just to get my son the correct education. Unfortunately, there was no room for him, and we didn't have the funds to put him into a private school. And homeschooling wasn't an option for us either because, my son needed special care, and I couldn't provide that for him at home.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, Mr. Hinojosa. Thank you again. I enjoy your testimony every time you come here. I wanted to ask you, you're registered on the bill.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, Senator. I'm a lawyer.
Judge.
I'm not doing litigation anymore, so maybe I'm just imagining that. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If I could,
Senator Taylor.
just real quick, Ms. Adams, your son Ryan, he's the example of what I've been talking about. For some students, even in the best of situations, best schools, that school doesn't fit them, but your son found a place where now he's thriving. He's reaching to do high school math in 5th grade. I mean, he's obviously very gifted in that area, but you have to put him in the right environment to really realize their full extent of their gifts. And I'm glad you're able to find that, but that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to overturn anybody's apple cart. We're just trying to find a place for some of those kids that need something that's more suited to their personal needs.
Absolutely.
And
I agree.
I appreciate what you've done for him.
Like I said on my testimony, I don't think this bill is going to be right for everybody, and I agree with you there. But I think my son fits that special circumstance. He's a very gifted child. His IQ level is way over 120. He was just tested like 3 weeks ago. Average for a child his age is about 70, just to give you a rough idea. It took lots and lots.
But without
and
your
lots of
initiative,
patience.
he would be in a system that would thought he wasn't all that good and wasn't all that smart. He may not have been
Absolutely.
able to thrive in that environment, but the fact that he was able to find that environment where he got a fresh start, you're seeing the benefits of that. I appreciate your diligence and effort to do that for your son.
Absolutely. I think any parent that wants the best for their kid would have done the same thing. Unfortunately, it took it took quite a bit of testing. I was told many times that it was going to be okay, that he wasn't going to pass, that he wasn't going to, don't be surprised if he didn't pass the STAR test, that it was quite okay if he got a low grade. And my son surprised the school because he scored above average and scored one of the highest scores in the state, actually, on the STAR test. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Ms. Adams, I think in today's world, he'd make a great president.
I agree.
No
I
offense
completely
to anyone.
agree. So make sure you guys remember his name and vote for him in the coming years.
Thank you very much, and I hope every parent is watching on
Mr. Chairman.
so they can realize they have a major
They're in love with
responsibility
her.
to their
They're gonna
children.
beg her to
Thank
come
you, sir.
there.
Just one last, Mr. Hinojosa, I agree with what Senator Huffine said. This is not a hearing on school funding, but like he said, there are a huge number of people who just say too much money is not enough. And you
So do,
came
like,
up
all
with
the
a figure of
Democrats
about
stand out?
$67.50 per student. You realize that Texas spends just about half of its budget on education, and that works out to an average of almost $10,000 a student.
So, and that's why I was very specific about what I said. And what I said was that it was $67.50 of maintenance and operation revenue from state and local revenue alone. That does not include INS funding. It does not include funding for the weights, like I mentioned as well, and it doesn't include federal funding. So all of those, buckets go into that bigger bucket, when it comes to school funding.
Well, maybe for another time, but if you'd ever like to come out of the office and give me a figure, which is hard to come by, it's always just, there's not enough. But I'd be interested in talking with you about what you think would be adequate funding.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I welcome a bill next session to make us 44 instead of 45, maybe 40, 25 in the states, the funding.
Okay.
Central Hall, Central.
If I may, I know we have a lot of witnesses, Mr. Chairman, but I just heard a couple of times or several times, this bill has nothing to do with school funding, but it does have a lot to do with school funding, doesn't it? I mean, regardless of where you are on the side of the bill, I'm not trying to debate the issue, the pros and the cons of the bill, but when you have a fiscal note, it says as introduced, a negative impact of $330 million for the biennium, then the effect of the bill, again, regardless of what side you're on, according to LBB's fiscal note, has a negative impact of $330 million, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just in the beginning. It will go much bigger than that, especially the public dollars that are lost to private schools. Indiana is one big example, and we included the numbers on the enrollment in there, which you can see not only an escalating enrollment because initially they opened the door only slightly, but as they opened the door more widely to other income brackets, et cetera, because that's what essentially happens with these voucher and neo-voucher bills, then you can also see an incredible increase in the percentage of white students versus students of color versus and more affluent students versus students of low income who were initially targeted as the beneficiaries of that. So whenever you talk about school choice, you have to talk about how your public schools are funded, because how good those schools are funded often may impact on the choices that parents make, and that's very unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Taylor.
Sorry, Mr. Nosa, you brought it up, so while we're on this, just talking about the take-up rates, the percentage of children that will take this up, can you speak to, are you knowledgeable about that? I don't want to put you on the spot. I know you didn't come here to testify for us on that topic, but you did mention it, so can you speak to that?
I'm sorry, on the weights?
Take-up rates, the percentage of children that will take the opportunity to take an education savings account. Do you know about that? I'm not trying to put you on on the spot.
No, that's not included in our analysis for Texas.
Well, but in other states, obviously, you couldn't know what ESAs are here.
Sure.
Because we don't have them.
So I can give you an example. If you look on page 4 in Indiana, which theirs is called the quote choice scholarship program that counts by ethnicity, and you will see the total number of students. It was initially 3911 in 2011 and 12,
Okay, so
and just 4 years later,
so 4,000 children.
4,000 children
In the state of Indiana?
in this state.
Out of how many children?
I don't see, I don't have that, but I'm happy to get that figure too. But the most important point is that only 4 years later, or in 2015, 2016, that number went up almost tenfold to 32,686, including 19,888 white students, whose families.
And how does that compare with the rest of the state in terms of ethnicity?
In terms of ethnicity,
Yeah.
I don't believe I have those figures here, but I'm happy to get those to you.
But and then it just okay. All right. Well, perhaps another witness will be able to speak to participation rates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you. Thank you. Senator West had a question from the LBB. I'm going to call on the resources. Aaron Henderson, and we have Andy McDormand.